guys, and welcome back to another video. And today we are going to be taking a look at the Jurassic World Dino Trackers Diabloceratops. And let's jump into this review. The first thing you might notice with this figure is it has new packaging. Let's take a look at that. Here is Blue and Beta on a nice orangey yellow background. The Jurassic World logo and Diabloceratops down there. The Dino Tracker logo. Then up here it has an example of the action feature. And over here it shows what kind of habitat it kind of lives in. Lives in desert. They kind of have like habitat areas for each of the dinosaurs. On the back it has the Jurassic Facts app. Some more demonstrations of the action feature. Them demonstrating the action feature. And then a couple of the other dino trackers like the I believe this is a Dryptosaurus. And it's forest. It has a Eocarcharia, which is mountains, and then a Kronosaurus, which is beach. Well, let's get this thing open. So we're just going to want to cut these wires up here. Then it should just come right out. Here's the Diabloceratops. Then let me get the tail from out of here. Okay, that took a while, but I finally got the tail off where we can attach it to our nice figure. Which I think that might be upside down. Yes, indeed. Just want to push that in. And here's our Diabloceratops. First, let's take a look at the sculpt. So we got a nice beak up here. And then up to the okay, once we go up to the horns, it has very minimal, but not too much necessary texturing. Then once we get to the eye, we have a nice sculpted eye with the iris right in the middle. And some nice dinosaur skin texturing. Once we go up the frill, pretty good sculpt on the frill, along with the kind of horns on the side. Once we go down the figure a little bit, we have the a little bit more wrinkling and scaling texture, especially on this hind leg. Then that leads us out to the tail. Next, let's look at the coloring, which this coloring is interesting. Has no painted finger or toenails like most Mattel figures, but it does have horn painting, and the upper beak is painted. But the lower beak is not painted, which slightly bothers me, and then the little kind of backwards facing horn on the cheek is also not painted, which that one's not too bothering. Let's go into articulation points for this. The front leg goes forwards. This is new, so it's a little bit stiff, but it goes forwards, backwards, and then outwards like all Mattel figures. Then the hind legs goes forwards, backwards, and it goes slightly outwards, not very much. Then we also have that very unnecessary, but always there, tail articulation. Which, speaking of the tail, this guy actually has a really long tail for a ceratopsian, especially for Mattel. I would never expect them to give it a long tail. Because Mattel never really gives long tails. And before I forget, here's the scan code for you can scan your Dino Trackers Diabloceratops. Okay, now that we're done with that, here we can see the action feature, which is this little switch up here. You're able to turn it, and the head turns and makes a roaring sound. So as you can see, you can have this guy shake its head. All in all, this Dino Trackers Diabloceratops is a really good figure. And another surprising thing is it has a lack of paint, but they pull it off pretty well. They have the red color, a little bit of beige on the stomach, which goes out pretty far. They also give paint job on the horns. Not the horns, the frill, and a little bit around the eye. But they also gave paint on the tail, which is unusual for Mattel. Another thing this figure does is its head goes up, but there's no way to make it go up. You kind of just have to push it up. And the faction feature doesn't do that. Let's move on to the size comparison. So first let me measure this thing. Looking at this figure, it is about 11 inches, so just under a foot. It's about right there at 11 inches. Now let me compare this figure to the very old Pachyrhinosaurus. It was labeled Sinoceratops, but it's a Pachyrhinosaurus. It is actually very similar in size to this. The only thing I may have to say is I think the diabloceratops is just slightly longer and the head is larger. Yeah, it's just barely longer. Barely by an inch, or by just a centimeter, beating it. So these two figures. Wrong one. Next, let's compare it to the very noisy Sinoceratops, the actual Sinoceratops figure, which is much larger than this one. It actually is probably a bit longer than it, but it's very similar in size. And the frill's kind of like this one, the horns kind of curve, and the frill kind of curves over this one. It also has a head tilting action feature, sort of. You have them sort of fight. So this one's head turns like this, then this one head turns like this. But the diabloceratops has much more vibrant colors, and this one has a more matte color. Next is the largest ceratopsid made by Mattel, the pentaceratops, which is absolutely huge compared to this. The pentaceratops is much larger than this. Surprisingly, it's about the same length as Sinoceratops, being just slightly longer than it. And this one, still have to do a review on this figure, but they actually look kind of closely related. Their frills look very similar. Their faces look very similar. It's very strange. Their bodies look quite different though, but they both have kind of longer tails. But anyways, like, they're about this big compared to each other. This one has no sound effects though. Next is the human figure from Mattel, which is a pretty good size compared to it. It's a good match for it. It's about that big compared to it. It's about the same size as the diabloceratops' head. This is a little bit more mid-sized ceratopsid compared to some of the other ones, or even a little bit on the lower end of the size range for a ceratopsid. And then next we have a velociraptor, whichever one has a velociraptor. And here it is compared to diabloceratops. They can look each other right in the eyes. The diabloceratops is actually only about twice as long as a velociraptor, if not that. A velociraptor is almost the length of a diabloceratops. It's about 1.5 velociraptors long. And yeah, I would like to compare it to one more figure before we go, and that will be the Tyrant Lizard King itself, Tyrannosaurus Rex. This thing is huge. Compared to a diabloceratops, it towers over it. It will completely annihilate this figure in real life. The diabloceratops is about half the length of a T-Rex figure and about half the height, so it's about like a quarter the size. And they're actually pretty good size up together. And yeah, there's one more really quick size comparison I would like to do, even though I said this was the last one. It is compared to this Animal Planet robotic Triceratops. There's another large figure compared to it. They kind of contrast each other with the colors. It's about the same size as like the Pentaceratops, and it also does this. And yeah, but it's a little bit smaller than that figure. The diabloceratops, is it worth it? Yes, indeed it is. It is a pretty good diabloceratops, actually. And if you see this figure, it's starting to pop up in a few targets. If you see it, I recommend buying it. And yeah, that's really all I have to say about diabloceratops. See you guys in the next video. Goodbye.
Hello there. I'd like to let you guys know that, well, let me show you. We've got merch. So, please buy some merch.